Hello and welcome to the next chapter of the competitive biography of Emanuel Lasker. We're back in Germany, so we're back to the German picture of Mr. Lasker, and today we will be taking our first look at the German Chessmaster Association, an association of German chess masters, including Emanuel's older brother, Dr. Bertold Lasker. Very interesting stuff within. Now, the ultimate goal of this association was to promote play between Germans for the purpose of practicing for international tournaments, because Germany is very lacking in this regard. If we compare it to England, the British Chess Association holds a tournament every year, alternating between national British only tournaments and the international tournaments. So, if you take a look at the previous 6 German Chess Federation tournaments, only one, Siegbert Tarrasch in 1889, was actually won by a German. The rest have gone to some foreign entities, either British, Austrian, or American. So the German Chessmaster Association was formed in the spring of 1890, and in the summer they held their first tournament in Berlin, which we'll be looking at today. Unfortunately, being a master of chess does not make one a master of chess organization, and this tournament was rife with controversy. Starting from the very first round, there was already a withdrawal of Lasker's first round opponent, Mr. Fritz Riemann. So Lasker's first round win over him was negated. That's why it looks like in the standings he has a bye. The other competitors are, of course, below the camera as per usual. The rest of the logistics were fairly commonplace for German tournaments. 20 moves per hour was the time control, 3 games had to be played every 2 days, and the prizes for the top 3 finishers were 300, 200, and 100 German marks respectively. So that's about all in the way of preamble I'd like to go through. If there's more, I'll talk about it in future videos. For now, let's introduce Lasker's second round, but our first round opponent, Mr. Horatio Caro. Now, Caro is an especially important figure in Lasker's history specifically. In an 1896 interview, Lasker revealed that Caro was one of the masters who refused to play him prior to him winning the master title at the 1889 Breslau Hauptturnier. So there was something of a score to settle, with Lasker now apparently being within the realm of Caro's reputation and actually able to play him. If the name Caro sounds familiar, this is indeed the Caro after which the Caro-Kann opening is named. Starting in 1886, Caro did his analysis of the opening, calling it simply Caro's opening. However, coincidentally, also in the summer of 1890, Kurt von Bardeleben posted an article where he first called the opening the Caro-Kann opening. The Kann being attributed to Mr. Marcus Kann, who played arguably the most important and famous game in this opening at the time, an 1885 win over Jacques Mises. A link to that game will be the first thing down in the description. So Caro is an important figure not only in Lasker's personal history, but also in the history of openings as we know them today. That's about all the preamble we should go through. It's time for the game. With the white pieces, Horatio Caro opened with knight to f3, and just as before, this devolved into a double queen's pawn opening after d5 and d4. Lasker played bishop to f5, and Caro continued striking in the center with c4. Now, e6 is perhaps unsurprisingly the usual move, and if you recall back to the match against Jacques Mises, we discussed why queen to b3 was not a very strong move, using a game played between Siegbert Tarrasch and Alexander Fritz. That game continued knight to c6, and Tarrasch took the bait and captured on b7. Fritz played knight to b4, hitting c2, which was defended with knight to a3. After rook to b8, the queen had nothing better than to capture on a7, and after rook to a8, they simply repeated queen to b7, rook to b8, etc., and the game was a draw. Instead of e6, Lasker continued with his usual opening innovations and played the move c6. Now, as far as I can tell, this move is a theoretical novelty for the time. I have not found another game from this time period or before that played c6, and it's pretty clear why. There's no immediate answer to queen to b3. So how should Lasker respond? It turns out that queen to b6 is the only good move, but it's a move with which Slav players nowadays should be familiar. Now, there are still certainly some pitfalls here. For example, in 1911, the players Karl Schlechter and Julius Perlis analyzed the trap following e3 knight to f6, taking on d5. C captures d5, queen captures b3, a captures b3. Their trap centered around the fact that black has to recapture on d5, either with the knight or with the pawn. They do not have time to throw in the intermediate capture bishop captures on b1, hoping to distract the rook from the open a file, because white has access to d captures on c6. And again, it's best for black to simply take this pawn and accept that they're going to be down a pawn after this bishop is taken. If they retreat it to e4, as they play in the trap, Then, just like in the game between Fabiano Caruana and Alireza Firouzja that went viral last year, white can win by sacrificing the rook on a7. As after rook captures a7, white simply plays c7. Both of these promotions cannot be stopped, and white will win the game. Now, don't let all that fool you. Queen to b6 is still the best move, and there are pages and books of theory dedicated to this position. However, this was not developed yet, and Lasker instead played the move queen to c8. And already on move 4, Lasker has made a terrible mistake. Caro first took on d5, c captures d5, c captures d5. Of course, the pawn is not up for grabs because of queen captures on c1, which would be checkmate. So Caro first defends this with knight to c3, and after e6 continues his nice development with bishop to f4. And now the threat is very simple. He wants to play knight to b5, knight to c7, and pick up the rook on a8. So how does Lasker defend against this? In his notes for the game, Caro himself recommended the move knight to a6, which does indeed defend against c7 fairly straightforwardly. However, he misses that white has a very powerful shot in e4. This has to be responded to right away, so d captures on e4, and now white delivers a very powerful check on b5. The king is forced to move, and in general, losing castling rights in a position where A, the queens are on the board, and B, you're down material, not a good sign. Black is completely busted here. Perhaps black's best try in this position would instead be to play knight to c6, so that after knight to b5, you can throw in this check, bishop to b4. The bishop is, of course, protected now. The king has to move king to d1, and now the king can escape the fork by going to f8. This is a completely crazy position. Again, white's lead in development should mean that they'll be better able to capitalize on this crazy position, but complicating things in any way possible is probably the best case scenario for black. Instead of either of those, Lasker chose to defend the b5 square with a6, but now he's introduced another weakness on the b6 square, which Caro immediately pounces on with knight to a4. Now knight to b6 also forks and wins the rook, so how does Lasker defend against this? Once more, Caro gives his opinion on the move knight to d7, which again does defend the b6 square. However, black is still just completely busted after rook to c1. This kicks the queen over to d8, and now simply queen captures on b7. Black is completely paralyzed. They have absolutely no development. At the very least, white has the option of playing e3 and picking up on a6, but it wouldn't be surprising if they come up with some sort of attack here. This is just completely untenable. Instead of that, Lasker played the incredibly ugly move rook to a7, which again does prevent the material loss. Knight to b6 no longer comes with a fork, but unfortunately this is still completely losing. Caro played knight to b6 anyway, kicking the queen to d8, and then he captured on b8. Bishop captures b8, queen captures b8, and finally queen to a4 check. And just like in the previous line, black losing castling rights in a position where the queens are on the board and they are lacking in development is potentially the end of the game right there. Lasker played king to e7, and for once I completely agree with Caro's notes where he says that queen to d7 is actually premature, because relatively speaking, the king is actually quite safe on f6. Now don't get me wrong, black is still completely losing here, but this is not the most professional and precise way to end things. He instead played the much stronger move rook to c1, whose purpose becomes clear in just a couple of moves. Lasker played g5, hoping to distract this knight, and indeed, if knight captures on g5, then perhaps black has time to construct some sort of defense. Caro instead played knight to e5, and after knight to h6, this rook to c1 move became useful as Caro played the move knight to c8 check. If the knight is taken, then of course the rook protects it, and if you move to f6, the knight to d7 check picks up the queen. So it was here on move 14 that Emanuel Lasker resigned the game. So I don't think it really needs to be explained just how disastrous of a result this is. I think this is the shortest loss in Lasker's entire career. Not only that, but to somebody who he has some personal beef with. And this following his round 1 win being negated, plus that whole debacle in England, this is just, in general, not a good time for Lasker. So this is probably one of the lowest lows we'll see him at, but that means there's nowhere else to go but up. So, much more chess to come. I look forward to seeing you there. Until then.